right now, though, we want to continue the Buffalo Bills discussion as we go out to Buffalo right now. Welcome in Jon Scott from Spectrum News 1 in Buffalo. He'll be talking with head coach Sean McDermott here in a little bit. So thanks for giving us some time. Before you jump on the line with Coach McDermott, your first reaction, though, to the firing of OC Ken Dorsey, surprised that he was the guy chosen to be the fall man for this latest struggle of Buffalo, or was this to be expected?
A little bit of both. I don't, mean to do a cop-out, but last night's performance, I put far more on the players. Just poor execution, turnovers, dropped passes, fumbles, 12 men on the field, which isn't even an offensive issue. It ultimately, though, if you look at the entire body of work, sorry about that. You look at the entire body of work of Ken Dorsey in a year and a half, and especially this past 6-game stretch, it just hasn't been good enough, and a lot of that, I think, is reasonable to put on the coaching staff.
John, is it just the lack of consistency game to game? Because this is a team that averaged 28.4 points per game last year, averaging 26.2 points per game this year. From a scoring standpoint, just on the surface looking at it, it doesn't seem like an alarming issue over 27 games. But is it just more than that in terms of the play calling? Because you follow the team very closely.
So the back half of last season, while the numbers statistically had them arguably the best offense in all of football, it just didn't look right. It didn't feel right. It looked like and felt like such a struggle. And even though the results were not necessarily indicating that, going into this past offseason, there was a lot of conversation of Ken Dorsey needs to be a better offensive coordinator. He needs to be a better play caller. You didn't see it against the Jets in the opener, but the next 3 games, and in particular, putting up 48 on the Dolphins at home October 1st, you're like, okay, they're humming again. Dorsey is doing what he needs to do. And ever since then, they went to London. They came back 6 games. It's been a struggle, a mighty, mighty struggle. You say they're averaging over 26 points a game. They haven't hit that mark over the last 6 games. Josh Allen has regressed. His decision-making has regressed. They seem very predictable. They have far too many 3-and-outs. It's bland. It's plain. Nothing that the Buffalo Bills offense of old looked like and felt like and was producing like has been seen for the past month and a half. And that's why I say I wasn't surprised that Ken Dorsey ultimately was the one to go.
Again, Jon Scott joining us right now. Give him a follow at Jon Scott as we're talking Buffalo Bills right now. So often when you see a midseason coordinator firing, it means the head coach understands, okay, seat's starting to get warm. Just how hot do you think the seat is now for the head coach of the Bills, Sean McDermott?
I know from an outside perspective, pitchforks and torches and everything like that, the fan base is starting to get really, really unsettled. It started with 13 seconds, that crazy ending to the Chiefs playoff game a few years ago. Then they lost in basically getting dominated by the Bengals in the postseason, the divisional round last year. And now they're 5-5 at the midway point and really a long shot to make the playoffs. So the noise is getting louder. Internally, though, I believe that Sean McDermott is absolutely safe going into next season. He signed a contract extension that coincides with general manager Brandon Beane this past summer. And listen, Terry Pegula owns the Buffalo Bills and the Buffalo Sabres. And since he took over those franchises, there's been a lot of turnover at the top with both. Sean McDermott has been the most stabilizing force that the owner Pegula has dealt with in either franchise. So to me, it's going to take a lot to disrupt things and go back to the way it used to be. Looking for a new head coach. It's something that has not necessarily been a forte of Pegula in terms of evaluating. He got lucky with McDermott, who then brought in his people to make this successful. So I think 2024 is when I believe the conversation really can ramp up in terms of, is Sean McDermott playing for his job?
On behalf of people in Las Vegas here, we thank you for Jack Eichel.
Yeah.
Also, what I mentioned, you mentioned Joe Brady's going to be the new OC. I got to be honest with you. I'm not thrilled about this from a Buffalo standpoint. He's the quarterback's coach there the last couple of years, was the OC in Carolina in 20 and 21, gets fired by Matt Rule halfway through the season. From your perspective of covering the team, how much of a positive impact do you believe he'll have?
It's interesting because we don't really know much about Joe Brady. We haven't heard much from Joe Brady since he was named quarterback's coach before last season. We haven't really seen a whole lot of him. He's out there in the practice field. He's working with Josh Allen. Haven't seen a whole lot of interaction or communication from what our vantage point is between Ken Dorsey and Joe Brady. So I don't honestly know exactly what to expect. We know his track record that's really heavily rooted in that magnificent historic run with Joe Burrow and LSU a few years ago in college. We know it didn't really work out in a very deficient Carolina position that he was in a couple years ago. So I don't really know. I also really don't know what anyone at this point in the season, 10 games in, can do to an offense mid-season. I don't think it's realistic for him to change a whole lot of things because there's a lot of pieces that then have to change as well. You just need to really maybe take what the system was with Brian Daboll that Ken Dorsey kind of carried over, fine-tune it, and maybe lean more into what has been proven to be successful and what Josh Allen and the other offensive players are most comfortable with.
It's Sharp Money here on VSiN talking Buffalo Bills with Jon Scott. We were mentioning earlier, John, how Buffalo now 2-1 to make the playoffs, by far the longest odds they've had since the season got underway. So much of the focus, though, is on offense. How do you see any defensive improvement happening? A team that was top 5 against the run, top 12 against the pass last year, now below league average in both categories with 2 key starters, Matt Milano and Trey White, now out injured.
And Daquan Jones also on the defensive line. I think he's an under-the-radar guy that maybe people outside of Buffalo don't realize how impactful he truly is and makes the rest of that entire front four really hum. They also, Micah Hyde, starting safety, was out. Christian Benford, starting cornerback, was out last night. Only 2 guys in that entire defense have not missed time this season due to injuries. I actually think while the statistics aren't up to the standard of the past that we've seen from this Bills defense, considering all the injuries and the guys they've lost and the guys that they're playing right now, I think Sean McDermott, as the defensive play caller, and that unit as a whole has done one heck of an admirable job to keep them in football games. They did not lose last night to the Denver Broncos because of the defense. I know they allowed that touchdown and get them in position late in the football game, but they did enough that the offense didn't pull their weight. Same thing can go for a couple other weeks during this 6-game stretch here. So defensively, they're not going to be the top-tier unit considering the guys that they've lost, but I think they have done a great job considering the circumstances, and so I think they've been put in good positions. They've had good coaching, and they still have some good players out there that they have done what they need to do to this point to keep the Bills in terms of winning. They're facing some high-powered offenses, though, down the stretch.
When you look at this team right now and the rest of the AFC, they dominate against the Miami Dolphins. They're still going to have an opportunity for a rematch later in the season. Is it out of the question to say they can still win the division despite where they are at the standings 5-5? Miami right now to win the East is minus 450. And you saw that game. What out of Miami against any competent team like Buffalo or anyone better than Buffalo have they shown us that makes the Miami Dolphins such a prohibitive favorite?
Well, good thing for the Dolphins, then. Their schedule doesn't put them up against a lot of the teams that are above 500 that they appear to not play up to their standard against. The Bills, on the contrary, though, they have the Eagles. They have the Chiefs. They have the Cowboys. They have the Chargers, and then they have the Dolphins as well. That's 5 of their final 7 games here, including also upcoming a Jets team that beat them in the opener and also beat them last year, both with Zach Wilson at the quarterback spot. Long shot is exactly where the Buffalo Bills should be in terms of making the postseason, but the AFC East is the only way that that is going to happen. Impossible? I don't believe so, especially with the game in hand and the last one in Week 18 against the Miami Dolphins, but it's going to be a tall task because they're going to have to beat teams that they're going to be underdogs against, and that's a spot the Bills have not been in much recently.
Yeah, Bills 4-1 now to win the AFC East. I mentioned 2-1 there to make the playoffs. John, before we let you go, you have the rematch this week, hosting the Jets, 7-point favorites market wide. What's the edge, if there is one, in the Bills-Jets rematch?
I got to tell you, I said it on my podcast after the game last night. I don't know how you could be confident the Bills could beat anybody at this point, regardless of what their opponent has looked like coming into the game. I know what Zach Wilson is. I know what that offense is. They're not that much different than the offense the Bills faced Week 1, and they still lost that football game because the Bills have been beating themselves. We'll see if this coaching change at the coordinator spot gives them a jolt. Maybe it refocuses them. Maybe they find their way a bit to play a little bit better and more like the Bills offense we've grown accustomed to. But Robert Saleh and that Jets defense has given Josh Allen issues, even if they've won the football game last year. It's going to be a tall task. I think the Bills could win the football game because I just think they're a better football team. But it's going to probably be another tough sledding the way it's been for the majority of this season.
Now, laying 7 with a total of 40. Check John out on the Buffalo End Zone podcast as well as Spectrum News 1 in Buffalo at Jon Scott TV. Really appreciate the time, John. Thanks again.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.